Well, good day. It's time to start another lesson, this one on climate and global warming. I call it facts, fiction, politics, getting real. Why in the world are we even talking about this? And I want to make it really, really clear to you that climate change is a political issue and that there are factions in this country, in this state, in this locality that believe strongly in this threat from not caring for the earth, so much so, and global warming and other violent changes or changes that cause violence to our environment. They believe so strongly that they are willing to sacrifice constitutionally protected liberties and to impose on us a way of life that is threatening to what we are accustomed to doing. So it is what Al Gore called the great organizing principle many years ago. Some of us remember, we're old enough to remember the late 70s when Time magazine ran a cover story about the great global warming, or cooling that was coming, the ice age that was on its way. Imagine that. We were being told we had to change the way we live because there was an ice age coming. And the next thing we know, there's this global warming scare. And this is what has dominated public policy, at least since the early 1980s, and is pushing us toward some very concerning public policy decisions. Now, I wanted to share with you before we got going that Psalm 8 talks to us about the earth. And in fact, it goes like this. O Lord, our Lord, how excellent is your name in all the earth, who have set your glory above the heavens. Out of the mouth of babes and nursing infants, when I consider your heavens, the work of your fingers, the moon and the stars which you have ordained. Think about that. When I consider your heavens, the work of your fingers, the moon and the stars which you have ordained, many believe that the world was created, is being created through evolution. So right here, we have a departure from many. What is man that you are mindful of him, and the Son of Man that you visit him? For you have made him a little lower than the angels, and you have crowned him with glory and honor. Now take a look at this particular verse. You have made him to have dominion over the works of your hands. To have dominion means to care for, to provide for, to be good stewards, to take care of. We are admonished by the scripture to take care of the earth. There's no dispute about that. It's a question only of how we do it and what is required. You put all things under his feet, that's man's feet, all sheep and oxen, even the beasts of the field, the birds of the air, and the fish of the sea that pass through the paths of the sea. We are clearly admonished to take care of things, to take care of the animals, to respect them, to take care of the birds and respect them, yes, and the fish of the sea. And do remember that they do provide us with nutrition. That's pretty important. And lastly, Psalm 8 says, O Lord, our Lord, how excellent is your name in all the earth. So the earth speaks of God, and it's his environment. He created it. He created it for our use and for his joy. If you understand the creation story, God created us to have fellowship with us and to enjoy us, and so we would enjoy him. So we are to have dominion over all the works of his hands. Let's take a look at the definition of climate, because that's a very, very key thing in our lesson. Climate is different from temperature. The average course or condition of the weather at a place, usually over a period of years, as exhibited by several things: temperature, wind velocity, and precipitation. Like a healthy climate, a warm, humid climate are different ways of saying this. So climate is an expression of several factors, not just heat. Here is another part of the definition, or actually another definition. The compositor generally prevailing, once more, the composite or generally prevailing weather conditions of a region, such as temperature, air pressure, humidity, precipitation, sunshine, cloudiness, and winds throughout the year, averaged over a series of years. So what is climate? Climate is the combination of a lot of factors stretched out over a long period of time. It's not what happened in 2018. It's what happened in the last 1,000 years or 2,000 years or 500,000 years if you believe in an older Earth, or even 4 billion years if you believe in the really old creation stories. The point is, climate is something that lasts a long time. It isn't something that changes abruptly, and you'll see that as we move forward. The Earth's climate then would be the predominant weather conditions across the globe over a period of time, measured by several factors, among which temperature is one. Please remember that this whole argument started with the words global warming, and still global warming is used, but not so much, because it is evident that it's a weak argument. And so the movement has been to climate change. Pay attention to that. What is global warming? Global warming is defined by Merriam-Webster as an increase in the Earth's atmospheric and oceanic temperatures, widely predicted to occur due to an increase in the greenhouse effect resulting especially from pollution. So Merriam-Webster is saying that the temperatures are going to increase under the definition of global warming. They're not saying global warming is real or not real. They're just defining it because of the greenhouse effect. There is a body of belief in creation, the creation story, that God created the earth with a terrarium around it, atmosphere that held in the moisture so that the moisture didn't escape, so that it recycled. If you think about a terrarium and how it works, that's what it is. And I'm not taking that as a theological position here. I'm just telling you a theory. And the theory then is that when the floods came, that the terrarium collapsed and that the ground opened up, exploded, and terrific water pressure came up from below and caused the lakes and oceans and streams and separation of the continents and all that to be totally rearranged. If you think about it, then if that is true, if God created the earth with a terrarium effect, then a high moisture content in the air must be a good thing, and a warm temperature, maybe like Hawaii year-round for everybody or something. An increase in global warming, further defined by dictionary.com as an increase in the Earth's average atmospheric temperature that causes corresponding changes in climate, and that may result from the greenhouse effect. I like the definition here because it's talking about the Earth's average atmospheric temperature. That's another part of the problem with measuring global warming or climate change. Where do you measure the temperature? Do you measure it at ground level? Do you measure it at 5,000 feet above ground level? Do you measure it at the stratospheric level or tropospheric level? Where do you measure it? And it makes a huge difference because these indicators that the temperature is warming are different at different levels. And so even getting that definition right is so important. Al Gore said many years ago, now it's 2006, the survival of the United States of America as we know it is at risk, and even more, it should be required. If more should be required, the future of human civilization is at stake. This is about the time he was out talking about climate change, actually global warming being the great organizing principle. And actually he was looking at it as an international organizing principle in which governments would change their economies, and governments would change the way they organize their people, and people would have to change the way they live, and rather dramatically, actually. And he made many, many dire predictions. I think it's very, very telling in this discussion. As I said, many people use this, and I say for political purposes. And I want you to look at this quote from President Barack Obama, who said, no challenge. Now, that's pretty significant that he's saying no challenge poses a greater threat No challenge poses a greater threat to future generations than climate change. Think of all the things that are going on today with the immigration thing, fighting across the world, and so on and so forth. And President Obama says it's the greatest challenge for future generations. So I want to share with you another challenge that was going on at the very time that he was saying this.
We want to flag for you tonight what may be an emerging genocide. The Islamic Army, known as ISIS, has seized vast territory in Syria and Iraq. And over the weekend, ISIS stormed more towns in northern Iraq. Now, have a look at what they're doing to the minority Shiite Muslims. These are Shiite mosques and shrines. In this video, Shiite men are herded together and executed in mass graves. Here, Shiite men are shot in the head one by one and dumped into a river. The slaughter is spreading. The Iraqi government is battling ISIS with limited success.
So I show you that very disturbing video because President Obama says the greatest challenge we have right now is climate change. And at the very same time, ISIS was rounding up other human beings and shooting them dead. And at the time, they were doing it with impunity. Since then, we've struck back, and President Trump says ISIS is defeated. I'm not so sure that's true, but certainly has been driven farther underground. What a great humanitarian crisis that was, maybe greater than climate change, at least at that point. Famous global warming quotes. This one comes from the great scientist Leonardo DiCaprio. You probably understand he's no scientist. He's an actor and a very wealthy one, very successful. Global warming, he says, is not only the #1 environmental challenge we face today. Global warming, understand, he said, global warming is not only the #1 environmental challenge we face today, but one of the most important issues facing all of humanity. At least he got that right. One of the most important. We all have to do our part to raise awareness about global warming and the problems we as a people face in promoting a sustainable environmental future for our planet. I don't have a lot of time to go into some of the terminology, but sustainable living, sustainable environment is one of the code words of the climate change alarmists. What does it mean? It means, to us, it means man having dominion over the earth, being good stewards, taking care of the environment so that we can all prosper. It's a very, very positive thing. To the people in this that are true believers in the religion of global warming, sustainable environment means changing the way we live. People living in high-rise buildings near train lines and doing away with cars and airplanes and those sorts of things. I'm serious. The great new Green New Deal, as it's called, literally talks about doing away with airplanes, doing away with all fossil fuels, and doing it all in 10 to 12 years, because if we don't, we're going to all die. That's how radical it is when you make global warming your religion. So when we use this word sustainable environment, we gotta figure out who's using it and how they use it in what context. So let's look at what DiCaprio is talking about when he says this. This is actually from a trailer of a movie that he made called The 11th Hour back in 2007. He's just done a new one on the environment.
The weather and the climate are making news in more than one region. Severe flooding has killed at least 72 people.
Under siege and the grip of unmitigated catastrophe.
The evidence is now clear. Industrial civilization has caused irreparable damage. Our political and corporate leaders have consistently ignored the overwhelming scientific evidence.
Not only is it the 11th hour, it's 11:59.
What we saw with Katrina is just prologue. Worse is yet to come.
The UN estimates that by the middle of the century, there may be 150 million environmental refugees.
There are too many of us using too many resources too fast.
The problem is that every living system is in decline, and the rate of decline is accelerating.
The tragedy is the potential extinction of humankind.
We face a convergence of crises, all of which are concern for life. Will our pivotal generation create a sustainable world in time?
People need to realize there are things they can do in their everyday lives. Everybody making a change adds up to something meaningful. Our project today is the welfare of all of life as a practical objective.
With existing technologies, we could literally reduce the human footprint on planet Earth by 90%.
We have to imagine what it would be like to redesign design itself. These are not technical issues nearly as much as they are leadership issues. There was a time when Republicans and Democrats joined to pass major environmental laws 500 years out. People look back at this time that this was our finest hour.
What a great time to be born. What a great time to be alive, because this generation gets to completely change this world.
Okay, that's pretty alarmist, right? It's 11th hour. In fact, it's 11:59. This is a crisis. Mankind is going to die off unless we make radical changes. I mean, that's what he's saying, and using images that are pretty disturbing. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not for throwing plastic in the ocean and having these big plastic, islands that are out there, and the trash and stuff that's accumulating. My goodness, I'm not a fool. I'm a Christian who wants to take care of the world and be a good steward. I just don't want to create a new world order where very powerful people run things and we become their subjects, subject to their whims and poor science. Richard Feynman said, it doesn't matter how beautiful your theory is, it doesn't matter how smart you are. If it doesn't agree with the experiment, it's wrong. We're going to take a look at some of those. The assignment for this lesson for my students was to read the book, Why Scientists Disagree About Global Warming. If you've never read this book, you can get it from the Heartland Institute, Why Scientists Disagree About Global Warming, the NIPCC report on scientific consensus. The key findings in this book were that extreme weather is not on the rise. This is one of the things that is used to convince us that we have to change our entire way of living because of all this extreme weather. Global ice is not at record lows. Sea level rise is not accelerating. Now, this is according to the scientist who wrote this book, Why Scientists Disagree About Global Warming. I remember listening to reports by Fred Singer in particular, who's one of the co-authors. There's no crisis, but there are changes occurring. There's always change occurring. A lot of it is based on flawed projections. You've got to understand that computer climate models upon which all these global warming projections are based don't match real world data. In fact, the computer science models are imprecise. They're subject to human input. There's an old saying about computers. It's G-I-G-O, GIGO, garbage in, garbage out. The conclusions that computers make are based on the data that goes in and how the data is crunched. And the people that write the programs that crunch the data have a lot of power or influence, I should say, over the outcomes. And what has happened, so common with these computer models, is that they predict that by a certain year the temperature is going to have risen a certain amount. And then when they see that's not happening, what they do is they fine-tune their models. In other words, the model doesn't come out with the projection that they think it's going to come out with, so they tune it so that it comes out with the projection that they're looking for. There hasn't been any global warming across the world for some 19 years. And most of my students are younger than 19, so for your entire lifetime. And there is no consensus despite what some have said. There's consensus that humans have an effect on the environment. I mean, God said that in Psalm 8. So he told us to have dominion. But articles and surveys showing support for a scientific consensus on global warming are flawed. They're deliberately misleading. Now, is global warming real? Yes. Now, did that throw you? It isn't a matter of whether it's real, it's a matter of what's causing it. The global temperature is higher today than it was about 150 years ago, at about the time that civilization started building large factories powered mostly by coal. It's true. We're about 1 degree Celsius warmer now than 1850. Did you get that? It's less than actually 1 degree Celsius, less than 2 degrees Fahrenheit. But the rise has not been steady and it has not been constant. It's been cyclical. We got cooler in the 30s and again in the 70s. My mom and dad were actually married in the 30s. In 1936, it was bitterly cold, absolutely bitterly cold all winter. And they did everything they could do to keep warm. And then, I mean, we heard these stories as kids, you know. And then in the summer of 36, it was blazingly hot. It was unbearably hot. Same year, probably you'll look, actually, if you look at some of the record temperatures, at least in Minnesota, a lot of them are still in 35 and 36 and 37, the high temperatures and low temperatures. It's pretty instructive. Then again, in the 1970s, there was another super cold time, and there's been virtually no warming for the last 19 years. So is it warmer now because of us? Well, a bit. We have had an effect on the climate, but it's mostly at the local level. If you think about a city, a big city with all its concrete that absorbs heat, with all the sidewalks and the tar and asphalt and, you know, less greenery and so forth, all that heat gets absorbed. It's definitely warmer in these big cities and so forth. It's retaining a lot of heat. The heat comes from where? From the sun. And it retains that heat more so than out in the rural areas. The rural areas have a different kind of climate from the cities. Human impact globally has been minimal compared to natural causes. This is the thing that we've really got to understand as much as we can, how much the sun, the oceans and the clouds and water vapor and all of that, and we don't understand those feedbacks. It is not clearly understood by climatologists and earth scientists and so forth, how all those interact. Natural variation within the last geological age has been actually about 4 degrees cooler, centigrade cooler than today, and 6 degrees centigrade hotter. And what that means is there's a natural variation in temperatures. The temperature goes up, the temperature goes down. It's a natural variation over time, and it has ranged from 4 degrees Celsius cooler than today to 6 degrees Celsius hotter than today. That's a normal range. And so, yes, it's warming. Now, this video, which is about 9 minutes long, I think that's right, is worth your attention. There's a couple of slides that follow this, actually I think 4 of them, that ask questions. And I'm asking you to take those slides out now and have them at your elbow as you watch this and take notes on it.
Late in the 10th century, the Vikings settled in Greenland. They found fertile fields and navigable waters teeming with codfish and seals. Generations had come to call this land their home.
So at the first they were farmers and settled on the large land, and they must have been very thrilled with the land they found.
Back then it was warmer, there was more trees. It was a very good farming land, very fertile, very green.
Rumors of this wonderful land must have spread. So you had more inhabitants. We think of this as a rough life, but they have had fashionable clothing and they have had time to play. It's been tough, but they have had good times as well.
The Viking communities in Greenland were vibrant and thriving by the year 1100. Within a few hundred years, they were all wiped out. The reason? Climate change.
The climate changed. That's a fact. Everybody knows that. So it was getting very hard to be a farmer. And, well, they didn't get enough hay for the animals. And the animals were freezing and starving, so the animals died. And when the animals die, the people die.
Around the year 1350, representative of the Bishop Regada visited Western Settlement, and he wrote home and told that there's no one here.
By the end of the 15th century, Greenland had grown so cold that all of the Viking people who had lived there for generations were completely gone.
They must have wondered, what happened to our climate system? I mean, did we do something to cause this? It will be really, really useful to learn from the Vikings' example. How do we go about coping with big natural changes in the sun and the Earth climate system?
How do humans cope with natural changes in the climate system? As scientists study the past, they're applying this knowledge to the changes experienced in the Earth's climate today. They are finding a natural cycle that modulates between cold periods and warm periods.
Climate is not a constant. We go through periods where it's much warmer, where it's much colder. We go through periods where it's wetter and drier. So the one thing we can say about climate in the future is that it will change.
As Greenland became cooler, other parts of the world were experiencing this cool down as well. In England, the Thames River began to freeze over during harsh winters. So did canals and waterways in the Netherlands. The Earth's climate was entering what scientists now call the Little Ice Age.
Condition is quite severe. In Western Europe, you can see people were actually praying in a church while the glacier is advancing. Essentially are praying that, please, God, don't let this ice coming and then ruin our village.
The Little Ice Age is part of a series of climate change eras that have been scientifically identified. In Europe, there was a warming period at the height of the Roman Empire, followed by cooling during the Dark Ages. The climate again warmed during the medieval period, followed by the Little Ice Age during the Renaissance.
The Little Ice Age ended at about 1850. So over the past 150 or so years, we've been in a cycle where the Earth has generally been warming.
This current climate cycle is what most people call global warming. Scientists have identified the recurring patterns of cooling and heating in the Earth's climate. But what causes this cycle?
The sun is the key ingredient to climate. I mean, 99.9% of the energy on the Earth that goes into the climate system comes from the sun.
The sun, of course, in terms of its light energy output, is probably the only true external driver of the Earth climate system, because there is no other forces on Earth that would supply that amount of energy for the air to move around, the ocean current to move around, or trees to grow. So there is no doubt that the sun is the main driver and supplier of energy to the Earth weather and climate system.
The sun's magnetism has a profound effect on the Earth. The sun's magnetic fields experience regular natural cycles. Sound familiar? When sunspot activity is compared to temperature changes over the same period, a remarkable correlation appears. Radiation from the sun seems to contribute to variations in temperature and climate on Earth. This is important when trying to understand climate patterns. The sun's natural cycles are a primary driver of our climate's natural cycles.
You have such a strong indication that there is this close relationship between how much the energy output from the sun changes and then how much the temperature changes.
What about the role that carbon dioxide, or CO2, plays in the Earth's climate? Is the warming being caused by human-generated carbon dioxide? Is it the sun? Or is it a combination of factors?
Humans do affect their environment, and one of the ways they do that is change the constituents in the atmosphere. I think the biggest driver is going to be other natural fluctuations, and carbon dioxide plays a small role in that.
The modern warming of Greenland has been going on since 1850, long before human-generated CO2 was entering the atmosphere. Looking at modern warming in general, a consistent pattern can be seen. With the best available records of temperature and atmospheric CO2 of the past 650,000 years, one finds that the Earth's temperature always rises first, followed by a rise in carbon dioxide.
The warmer Earth gives birth to more vegetation, which in turn has a more active carbon cycle. And so as a result, carbon dioxide may in fact follow atmospheric temperature change as opposed to being a leading indicator.
Published papers clearly shows that it is always the temperature rises first by at least several hundred years to a few thousand years. And then the carbon dioxide curve responds and it follows. So it is a very clear scientific consensus on this issue.
In other words, a warmer Earth leads to increased CO2 levels, not the other way around. That's an important realization, given the increased focus on human-generated CO2.
Most of us still have that nagging question in us, Yes, we have emitted all this carbon dioxide. Are we really, really melting all the ice cap? Or is it something even more powerful than that? I mean, meaning that could it be even the sun actually is doing it?
The world's oceans offer another example. They contain large amounts of carbon dioxide. When the oceans heat up, that CO2 is released into the atmosphere.
If you started to warm the surface ocean temperature, the ability for the ocean water to hold this carbon dioxide in the system is a lot less, meaning there will be more of this carbon dioxide effusing out.
All of these theories are being explored by scientists to fully understand the complex factors that influence climate. However, the current political landscape endorses just one theory, that human-generated CO2 is the principal cause of global warming.
Those views are indeed promoted by political bodies, which is the Intergovernmental Panel for Climate Change, and there appears to be a corrupted process, in my opinion, of the bodies, where I think science and scientists are being misused in a lot of ways. And these are all becoming really a war of words instead of war of evidence and science that troubles me.
There's a science document, which is really written by scientists for scientists. There's also a summary for policymakers. It's put together by policymakers, and in many cases, they go back to the scientists and say, can you change the science document to match our summary? We want to beef this up. We want to make it look worse. That's not the way science is done.
They are clearly promoting the vision that if we do not cut our carbon dioxide emission, disaster, crisis, whichever bad connotation you can find, will come to Earth. So it is that kind of alarmism that appalls me as a scientist.
What we have to remember is climate changes and climate fluctuates. And really, while we think humans have an impact on our environment, which we do, the global climate system is still far too complex to be simply affected by one change in one small component of it.
There is no one in the world who would insist that everything is having to do with the sun. All we are trying to do is that there's this plausible picture of how the sun could cause some of the changes in the climate system, and why not study it carefully? It's very, very difficult, in my opinion, to try to insist and suggest that carbon dioxide, even as of today, when we emit this carbon dioxide, it's going to drive the climate system. It's a complete false picture, and there's no such scientific basis to support that.
So the idea of science is you're really supposed to be skeptical. So there's always a quest to verify what we know, to understand that we haven't made a mistake, and that we continue on and develop science. If we close our mind, if we close the doors, we are now shutting ourselves out from the real truth, which is what science is all about after all.
There is still much to learn about the many ways in which solar activity, the oceans, and other environmental variations may influence the Earth's climate. But the more scientists are allowed to do their research in an open dialogue, the more they will understand what is truly affecting the Earth's warming today.
Pretty remarkable, really pretty remarkable. I remember reading a very important paper, I thought, by a former, oh golly, he was Harvard, I think, physicist. It's terrible, I don't remember the guy's name, or that I don't remember the title, and I shouldn't be talking about it in a teaching context, I suppose, but it made such an impression on me. He was a physicist, and he was talking about how global temperatures are taken at different levels. So, you know, whether it was surface temperature or tropospheric or stratospheric, and how that affects things, but and where the CO2 levels are measured, and where they actually make a difference, and so forth. And the fact is that our plants, all our green plants, need CO2 to survive. And he was talking about how the current indexes are, you know, somewhere around 300 or 400, whatever the number is, parts per whatever. and that the global alarmists, global warming alarmists, are trying to say that's too high and it's causing all this heat and we have to drive it down. Well, at some certain point, below 200 at whatever level, if we drive it down too far, guess what happens? The plants can't get enough CO2. If the plants don't get enough CO2, then we don't have enough what? We don't have enough food, we don't have healthy air, and so on and so forth. So his answer, actually, in his analysis, and I don't know if he's right on this or not, but his analysis is that we should be pushing for about 2,000 whatever it is, parts per, I don't know how they measure it, okay? Instead of the 300 or 400 that they're alarmed by now, it could be as much as 3 or 4 or 5 times as much, and it would be even healthier. That's what made me think, I think, of the terrarium effect. If he's right, imagine what would happen if the CO2 levels were really high. Would that create this dome again and this lush tropical-like climate that maybe existed at the birth of the Earth? So we can learn a lot from Greenland. When did the Vikings settle in Greenland? Around the 10th century, and describes Greenland as plush, very healthy for humans and for animals. Farming was robust. It was difficult, but the people enjoyed their lives. They had nice clothes. They had time to play. So it wasn't all work. By the time the bishop got there in 1350, there was nobody there. They were gone. And the question is, what caused the severe climate change that occurred by 1500? And it appears to be a natural cycle. And as we look at those ages, which we'll do in a second, of global warming, global cooling, that's the natural cycle. And by the 1500s, I think it was the 1500s, I may have the dates wrong now, the Thames River and the canals of Amsterdam were freezing over. I think it might be useful to find out since 1850, maybe it was 1850 they were freezing over, how many times the Thames River has frozen over since then. Interesting question. And before then, if there's any record of it, the video talked about 5 eras of climate change during the Roman era, when it started to warm, and then there was a cooling period, and then there was a warming period, and then there was a cooling period, which we say culminated in the Little Ice Age in 1850, and now another warming period. And if you look at the span of years, they're often 400 to 500 years. So one would expect that we're going to be in a gradual warming period until 2250. Something like that, or 2300, the year 2300. None of us will be around to see that, but a natural warming cycle and then a cooling cycle would begin again. We're currently in a cycle of climate change that appears to be warming. And he talks about, Dr. Soon in particular, talks about the primary source of heat and energy on Earth as the sun. As far as I know, we don't have any human created programs to change the climate on the sun. That would be a challenge. Sunspot activity and variations in temperature seem to be causative. In fact, there was a period of time, we may still be in it as I make this lesson, where sunspot activity has really slowed down. To, every 11 years, there's a natural cycle of sunspot activity. And so the temperatures tend to vary, related somewhat to those that sunspot activity. So consider carbon dioxide. Humans do change the constituents of the atmosphere, and CO2 might play a minor role in this, but there are other things that affect that climate more and are more potent greenhouse gases, actually. So which rises first? According to Dr. Soon and Dr. Legatus in tracking temperatures, the heat goes up before the temperature, the temperature goes up before the CO2 levels rise, not the other way around. So a warmer Earth actually increases CO2 levels. It seems to be, as far as they believe, a natural cycle. And as ocean temperatures rise, CO2 trapped in the water escapes into the air and increases the amount of CO2 in the air. It has nothing to do with what you and I do. But our politics say that global warming is causing climate change, and that because of that, we have to make radical changes in how we conduct our lives, and governments becoming more and more engaged in our lives. Scientists write reports that policymakers use to write reports. And then when science and policy collide, according to Dr. Legatus, the scientists are overruled or asked to rewrite their reports to coincide with what the politics is driving. So certainly not all climate variations can be proven to be directly linked to the sun, but Dr. Soon says nobody's arguing that. But the evidence that CO2 is the primary driver of climate change is very, very weak, if even existent at all. So I like to ask this question kind of for fun. Look at this, dihydrogen monoxide. How dangerous is it? When it's used as an industrial solvent and coolant in nuclear plants, the production of styrofoam as a fire retardant, in many forms of cruel animal research, in the distribution of pesticides. Imagine that, hydrogen monoxide is used in the distribution of pesticides. Even after washing, produce remains contaminated by this chemical as an additive in certain junk foods and other products, as an active ingredient in rust. It's a direct contributor to accidental death by drowning, and has been known to cause irreparable damage to property. This is dihydrogen monoxide, a very, very dangerous compound, apparently. So the question is, considering all the rhetoric about CO2, should we ban or cut down the use of dihydrogen monoxide? Well, first of all, we better know what it is. You know it better as H2O, called water. It's kind of fun to think about when you think of all the things that water causes. And it is very destructive when there's a lot of it. We have floods. And so it's kind of a tongue-in-cheek way of saying there's water all around us, and water causes an awful lot of trouble, but we don't try to get rid of water. Why? Because we have to have water to survive, just as we do carbon dioxide. You can't survive without carbon dioxide. The most prevalent greenhouse gas is actually water vapor. And it does affect climate. The more there's, and you feel it in humidity during those hot, muggy days. This is a 3-day enhanced water vapor loop picture that shows actually the ability of water vapor to block the sun's rays. And of course, that would cause cooling and then trap hot air, hot, moist air underneath. What's the most dangerous greenhouse gas? Probably politics. Finally, after 12 years of no major hurricanes making landfall, there was a global warming alert when Harvey and Irma were ready to strike. This was actually a play on Rahm Emanuel when he was aide to Bill Clinton, said, "Let no crisis go to waste," or to Obama, excuse me, "Let no crisis go to waste. Let no hurricane go to waste." So I just, want to share these ideas with you. And concluding the lesson, it's really about stewardship, taking care of the earth. I believe in recycling. I think recycling makes so much sense. I believe in cutting down on my use of fossil fuels because they're expensive. But I tell you that building wind turbine generators is not without negative consequences. First of all, it only generates a small percentage of electricity at this point in time. And the number of acres that it takes to build a successful wind farm that actually makes a dent in electrical production is enormous. It kills millions of birds every year. And those windmills are generated, they're made from minerals, from plastics, in other words, fossil fuels. They're made from precious metals that are very, very hard to mine and cause degradation to the environment. So they're not without environmental impact, every one that we build. I saw a picture recently of a windmill, and this was probably photoshopped, that had gotten covered with ice. And it's like, an airplane on an airfield. You don't take off with ice on the wings, so they de-ice it with chemicals. And this picture was of a helicopter hovering over wind generators, de-icing them with a chemical. In other words, spraying chemicals on the earth and at the same time burning a lot of flight fuel to do so. It's quite fascinating. The batteries that are used in electric cars are very expensive, and they're very reliant on precious minerals and rare earth materials that are very difficult to mine. Even the photovoltaic cells that are used in solar panels and the glass that has to be made, you make glass with a lot of heat, a lot of energy. I don't know, maybe they're not all glass anymore. Maybe they found some other material, but then it would likely be plastics made from fossil fuels or a combination thereof, and rare metals. And those, I don't know if you've ever seen one of those solar panel farms. There's one along the 15 going from the upper desert across from Las Vegas back to Los Angeles that caught our eye when we were traveling. It was sitting out there in the field, if you can imagine, a sea of solar panels, and it was reflecting the sun up out in the desert, very, very hot, and it was pointing towards some sort of orb that was radiating out to, I don't know what, to a satellite. I don't know where it goes, how they actually get the energy to anybody, but what I remembered was you could feel the heat, you know, even from a mile or 2 miles away or however far we were. And literally, think about it, birds flying over that field being fried instantly. And then how do you keep the solar panels clean? What do you do if they get covered with snow in Minnesota? I mean, somehow, we haven't solved these problems, okay? And then you have the problem with the global warming crowd often being anti-nuclear power, which is the cleanest, safest way to produce electricity. So our politics just affect this immensely. And you'll see in the elections coming up how certain candidates are going to make this a big, big issue, as if it's the worst crisis there is. We've already been told this by some of the more leftist Democrats running for president and in Congress. And I hate to say it, but that's it. And Republicans will go along in a great way because, frankly, it's really hard to talk about the things that you just saw. They're not popular, and when you do, you get shouted down. Dr. Legatus, who was featured in that film, oftentimes is castigated. I mean, he's put down by his peers as being a kook. Well, I'm sorry. Look at the evidence. So here's another issue. Rest of your life. I'm sorry, young people, you're going to have to deal with this. We old folks, we're going to find our spot in the earth, our spirit in heaven with the Lord. Our soul, we're gone. We'll get new bodies someday. But meanwhile, our bodies, as they deteriorate, are going to contribute to pollution. All right. Have a great day. You know I love you.